Hello friends, Kitty here, and I am here today, as you can probably tell, to talk to you about the hit film Fateful Findings by Neil Breen. Oh wait, that's the wrong video. Sorry. No, actually I am here to introduce you all to the wonderful world of radio. Analog, digital, and software defined. So, what the heck is a radio? And why the heck is this still relevant? Especially in the age of cell phones and computers. A lot of people may scoff at the humble ham radio, but I assure you, it is not only lively with activity and action and things to learn, but pretty useful applications for making sure that you don't die. So, with that said, I think in this video I'm going to cover, it's kind of more of an introduction for folks who aren't familiar at all with radios. But kind of in the middle and near the end there, I am going to cover some stuff for folks who are radio users who might find novel or new. But yeah, just sort of going to keep this on the intro sort of side of things. I'm going to discuss what exactly radio is, just some of the key definitions and terms so that you have like a base understanding, the legalities behind radio broadcasting, and you know why you need a license or when you don't need a license. And then finally I'm going to touch up on some stuff that you can actually do today without a radio or a license, and ways you can kind of get started on the hobby already, sort of like I did once upon a time. And so yeah, you can do that. I'll give you some other tips on like intro radios and starting things to do and why and useful features of a radio, as well as then at the end I'm going to cover this handy digital radio, and we'll discuss some of those topics as well. Alright, so with that said, I think we should start with what the heck is radio? So, radio is, to put it bluntly, the Force. Basically. Well, it allows us some vehicle, just like kind of a ship uses water, some means to deliver signals across great distances over the air. And, I mean, what those signals are can be anything from Morse code to TV signals and radio. There's really no shortage of applications of radio. For instance, probably one of the most common ones you have around you all the time is your Wi-Fi home router. All these wireless networks and your phone. Your car keys, Bluetooth, lots of everyday items use radio essentially to communicate. All that sort of is, I mean, to condense it, is really all that's different is the frequency and exactly what sound or data is being transmitted over it. And radio is transmitted over certain frequencies. Now, frequencies are measured in hertz, so you might have heard like 144 kilohertz, 10 megahertz, stuff like this. So it's referring to the frequency at which that radio signal sort of peaks and valleys, if you want to imagine it, like the sine wave. And so as you got your lower frequencies are going to be going to have a much bigger gap between the waves, and your higher frequencies are going to start getting much closer and closer together. So what sort of is the differences here? Well, higher frequencies, they have a few advantages. So they are very good at going through material. They can transmit large sums of data at one time. They're considered, they have more bandwidth. And like as far as line of sight short communications, they're highly ideal. However, one issue with them is in order to expand the signal range of higher frequencies, it takes more power to do that. So therefore, that's why you see sort of 5.8 gigahertz in wireless routers, things that would be considered, that'd be very high frequencies. They only radiate a field that's so big. They don't really expand for miles or, go thousands of miles. It may be more like a few feet because the power it takes to make that drive that is a lot higher versus, say, broadcasting at 10 megahertz. I can do that from essentially just like a home radio, and folks do that all the time, and can broadcast thousands of miles. So there is some trade-offs. And if you're probably thinking then, well, if at lower frequencies I can use less power to transmit a longer distance, well, why would everything not just use low frequency everything? Well, that's kind of where we start getting into the legalities and the governing bodies and regulations of radio, because that's sort of what keeps it all from becoming a noisy mess. Because effectively, if everyone just started using the same lower end frequencies, it would cause quite a bit of other interference. It would cause could interrupt TV signals and things that are very important that are usually broadcasted on the lower frequencies, national alert systems and things like this. So for a lot of reasons, it's just simply more feasible for regulation to sort of ban the general audience from, general transmitting and require a license. And in the United States, that's where the FCC comes in. You have your 3 levels of licenses, which are going to be general, or technician, my bad. It's the first, general, and then amateur extra. And essentially, at each different level of license, you get access to more frequencies, or more bands, and you can transmit more varied kinds of things over them. So with that said, probably a lot of folks assume then that, without a license, it can't really do much with radio. And, that's fair, because generally speaking, you aren't allowed to broadcast, but it's not necessarily true of all cases. So at least in the United States, now, forgive me, I know I have some viewers in places outside the U.S., so I'm not going to be 100% sure what your local governing radio bodies are, but I would generally assume many are going to be very similar to our FCC and how we do the process, but just be aware. But anyway, here in America, if you do not have a license, you are able to receive radio broadcasts. There's nothing that's regulating you or stopping you from setting up a radio receiver and listening to whatever you want. Whether or not you're able to decode and make sense of what you're listening to is another thing entirely. But generally speaking, as far as the receiving end, as the signals are out in the air, you can listen in. Now, where it gets tricky is transmitting and sending signals of your own. And generally speaking, that's not going to be allowed for non-licensed folks. But the family radio service, so the reason why walkie-talkies are able to work is the family radio service is a set of frequencies at about 142 megahertz to 147 megahertz, I think. I think I totally screwed that up. It's 422 to 427 maybe, I think. I totally screwed that up. But either way, it's a set of frequencies that are allocated by the FCC for free use by non-licensed users. So up to 1 watt of transmitting power. So most obviously commercial or consumer walkie-talkies are going to be transmitting at 1 watt. But I will say I have the infamous Baofeng here. Is like the most popular radio in the world, and this can actually transmit at 1 watt. So even if you have no license, you could still, on the 1 watt setting, transmit on the family radio service frequencies. So it's kind of a good thing to note, like if you're going camping and taking other folks on a trip without a license, there is ways for them to broadcast without a traditional walkie-talkie that would still be acceptable and legal. So that's something to always note. Okay, thanks for bearing with me on that. It might have been a little dense with information, and of course I was kind of glossing and may have missed some details. So don't worry. It was just sort of like an introduction and, got you used to some terms you might need. But let's say now you're interested in sort of taking the plunge and trying it out, but you don't have a license or radio. How do you get started? Well, thankfully, in the 21st century, we have something called software-defined radio. So similar to just how, because your computer is a radio transceiver thanks to its Wi-Fi. But you can essentially, through software, feed the software radio signals either through an external radio or a source online. And you can actually just, like as if it's any other radio traffic, you can decode it, read text messages, and things like this. And typically, SDR is done with tools like software such as SDR Sharp, and using hardware like many might be aware of the RTL SDR dongle, and that's actually what I started on in radio. And many might be familiar with the Raspberry Pi, but I basically used to just connect this thing up with my RTL SDR dongle, and lo and behold, I have a functioning SDR radio. But say you don't even have those things. There is another level to higher. There is what's called WebSDR, which is super cool. And throughout the world, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of servers and real-life radio stations that are interfaced with what's called WebSDR. And essentially you can just sign into it and access it like just through your web browser, like it's a website. And now you effectively have control of a much more sophisticated antenna on radio than you probably would otherwise have at home, which is pretty cool. And there are stations and servers all over the world. So depending kind of on what sort of traffic you want to listen to, you might pick a particular station. All kinds of peculiar and off-the-wall sort of weird things to listen to on there, like it's like North Korean English propaganda, the high-frequency global communication system. But that's for like military. Air alerts sometimes come through. You can listen to specific bases and their radio traffic. It's pretty cool what you can pick up on. People monitor famous number stations through WebSDR. And you can do that all without needing a license because you're just listening. There's no transmitting, and you don't need any really any knowledge. It's not like you could break their radio, so it's a pretty good way to just sort of start to fiddle with buttons and learn what upper sideband versus lower sideband. Why would I use this one to listen on instead of this one? And it's like subtle things that you would be otherwise abstract trying to learn it out of a book, but might make a lot more sense being able to like tangibly see and feel. So WebSDR is an amazing resource for that. And for some more advanced usage, S2 Underground has actually covered in depth a way to use what's called JS8 call alongside WebSDR to get group texts. And it's even possible then to send group texts, but obviously with a license. And I will post a link to that. I will try to post plenty of links in the description to this video, but yeah, S2 Underground's video on that is super cool and definitely an interesting application of WebSDR that folks might not have otherwise thought of. And again, no hardware or radio or license required to use that. So pretty cool. Let's say you got a taste of the radio fun now. You've been listening in, but you want to start getting, your own radio. You want to get connected with your local radio groups and start to actually, do some real world practical stuff with it. Well, where do you, and you don't have your license quite yet. What do you do? Well, as I mentioned kind of earlier, there is the legendary Baofeng radio. And there would be other similar kind of entry-level, what are called VHF, UHF, very high frequency, ultra high frequency, ham radios. And essentially, yeah, these would be the kind of ideal platform to start getting into radio, in my opinion. I think some others might disagree. But these handhelds are super easy to use and super accessible. They're really cheap. The parts for them are like nothing. These batteries last a long time. These Baofengs can, last for at least a day. And they're pretty robust little machines for being so inexpensive. And at the end of the day, like if you're just trying to learn, you don't have your license yet, you can flip it on and tune in. There are plenty of frequencies around you locally that might be of interest. So you might hear what we got going on here.
Rain showers likely in the morning, then partly cloudy with a slight chance of
so on
rain showers
162.550 megahertz, we are listening to the NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. And they broadcast weather reports throughout the United States on that a couple frequencies. And you can constantly tune into those and get real-time regional weather reports and forecasts and warnings. So without needing anything at all, you could at least get that much. And then next, the other thing to do would be to start, like as I mentioned earlier, the family radio service frequencies. You could, at the very least, communicate on those up to 1 watt of power. And then, from there, the next logical step will be to start finding your local repeaters and ham groups. So repeaters are essentially just other radios, often like towers, that take a signal and rebroadcast it out to a wide area on, a specific frequency. So essentially allowing like a whole bunch of people to use a singular tower as a way to, all talk and communicate with each other. And repeaters are massively important in the radio world. And fortunately, it's just somewhat easy to find. So if you go to, I'll put a link in it here, but repeaterbook.com. Well, if you can search it by area and get notes on specific ones, but from there you can start to find sort of what repeaters are in your area and what they do. And you'll start looking out for what are called nets. So nets are what ham radio folk run, and it's essentially just a group free call, just meeting where folks can just call in and chat and go back and forth for a specific period of time on a scheduled date. So it sort of gives you some routine and ways to make other contacts with radio folks in your area. And they're often more than excited to have new hams. But even, again, without your license, is something to listen to. Like, that's a great way to start hearing, the proper protocol that people use on the radio. Getting used to just trying to, pick the words out. And because listening maybe through a fuzzy radio might not be, folks are pampered by our digital audio and our lossless music and all this, so it may take a bit of training to have some real skill in listening to it, but totally worth the effort. So by all means, find your local repeaters in your local groups. And one thing I would highly recommend in particular is your local APRS group. So this is the Amateur Radio Emergency Management, something like that. And these are all over the United States in individual cities. And another pro tip, I guess, while I'm at it, but these the Walker Razor radios, many folks probably have. These totally operate on the family radio service frequency, so you can chat with your friends that have these using your handheld. Okay, so let's say you've had your Baofeng, you've got your license, you've been hanging out with the local nets, or you're at least familiar with your local radio groups. You have a radio plan set. You've been listening into frequencies. You're feeling pretty confident, and you want to start getting some real survival application out of a radio. Well, this is where I feel the next logical step comes in to DMR. So digital mobile radio. There are several other modes of digital radio, but this is probably about the most common and ubiquitous and easiest to find repeaters for. And these things are amazing. So why on earth, in the day and age of cell phones, would this be more handy to have than that? Well, for starters, my lovely GD-88 here runs on a lot less power. It can last for like a day on full battery broadcasting, and and as you can probably tell by this fancy antenna here, it can operate at much greater distances than my cell phone. So that is pretty handy. Many times I am camping or out hunting, and I am going to be pretty far removed from where there is cell phone access. At least with this, I could still hit a repeater many, many dozens of miles away if there was one in the area. I could radio a friend at the camp. There would be several ways I could still reach out to the world and be found with my radio. Even where cellular networks and nothing else really exists. And I could rely on this for a lot longer. Another thing that's kind of handy with this, particularly the GD-88, but a lot of digital radios, is it has GPS and what's called APRS. So essentially, I can flip it on here. You can see my little thing. And then with just turning on the GPS mode here, I start broadcasting my position to APRS. And that is a nationwide system for basically just tracking radio stations. And you can get, it's a central website that anyone can access. So what's handy is with your call sign, if you give it to like your loved ones or your friends, they could actually track where you are on your radio directly there live on the map. And actually you could send messages to GPS and APRS saying like, today's good, food low, fuel, need fuel. You could, broadcast whatever, change your message accordingly if it was relevant to whoever you want watching your position. So that's kind of a really handy, I think that's just a good hunting and outdoor sort of additional little survival tool to have. As well as just the ability to navigate with a map, so I can get my coordinates exactly off of this. And with the coordinates, I can cross-reference it with a real map and quickly find, where I am there, which I have done, and it's pretty cool. Other things you can do, you can send texts. If you have other digital radio users and groups that you're in, you can send have like group text chats going, which is pretty handy. And sort of reduces the signature instead of having to hold my push to talk and broadcast my voice out for a long period of time. You could just all send each other quick messages that you can get back to at any time, which may or may not just make life a lot easier. Okay, and there are also what are called Brandmeister repeaters, and these are super cool. So it's sort of like a network, internet networked radio repeater. So my digital radio, I can reach out to a Brandmeister repeater just like I would with any other repeater. Only instead of just rebroadcasting on my local repeater, it also travels through the internet and to all the other Brandmeister nodes that it can connect to and broadcast out of there. So it's pretty cool using just essentially a VHF, UHF handheld radio. I can just twist the knob, turn it on. I can be talking with people in like really any part of the world that has a Brandmeister repeater, which as it turns out is a lot. So it's pretty interesting. I've been able to learn quite a bit more. Like a lot of folks complain in the radio world that, I can never find folks to talk to, or folks aren't really active in my area, and there's just not many groups. I don't know who to talk to, or I'm shy. This has been super great because very quickly you can find any number of contacts and people wanting to talk. And anything from just wanting their audio and signal checked, and you can just pop it and be like, oh yeah, sounds great, to there are city-specific and like topic-specific talk groups. It's pretty cool. And so, yeah, if you ever needed someone to chat with, there's a voice on the other end. I feel like DMR Radio has amazing capabilities for that. And it's pretty cool that I don't need high frequency, and I don't need my general class license and things like that to reach people on the other side of the planet, which is pretty cool. So I'm a huge fan of these digital radios, and particularly the Radioddity GD-88 is what I got. You can hear we got it's a little slow right now, but there's almost always people talking on this channel, it's a hoot. So highly recommend. I feel like the digital radio, there's a lot more. I'm just scratching the surface here, really, because at the end of you can use this for mesh networking. You can integrate this with ATACs and real-time map building. There's a lot of potential applications and things that people already readily do with digital radios. Potential is quite high. So forgive me, ham radio nerds who watch this video. I know I briefed over a lot of things. I didn't really cover HF super in-depth. All topics I plan on getting to later, but I felt like this was a good way to get people introduced at all levels into something that they can either move on to next or get started with. I think radio is great, and particularly folks that are interested in the emergency preparedness, civil defense, and just sort of outdoor safety. The radio skills are incredibly useful to have, and even just knowledge of the terms and what people are slinging around and how the technology works can pay off a lot of dividends throughout your life. So I highly recommend all of them. You can't go wrong. I had the Baofeng UV-5R. There is also the Baofeng, is it BF-F8HP? I always screw up the name, but this is the one I use in most of my videos where you've seen me with a radio. And then, of course, the Radioddity GD-88. But whatever you choose, by all means, I hope you stick with it and you hang out with us. I hope one day we get to have a talk group or something, a net with everyone, or something. We'll figure it out. But in the meantime, I hope that helps. I hope that at least gives everyone something to learn. And yeah, thanks for sticking with me, y'all. Alrighty, you have a good one. Bye.